Right, so the United Kingdom has long presented itself as a nation committed to international law, the defence of human rights, and the maintenance of rules based order. Yet, recent developments in its relationship with Israel and Israeli defence contractors suggest, well, otherwise, let's put it. Last month, the government under Keir Starmer formally proscribed Palestine Action, the grassroots protest network that had made its name by targeting the UK operations of Elbit Systems, Israel's largest private arms company. This move came at a moment of acute global scrutiny, of course. The International Court of Justice had already ruled that Israel's war in Gaza posed a plausible risk of genocide and had issued binding provisional measures ordering the state to prevent such acts. At precisely the moment when international law required caution and distance, therefore, Britain was criminalising its own citizens for dissent instead and moving closer to Israel's defence industry all at the same time. The deeper irony is that the fight back against that prescription, the announcement of a judicial review into the legality of it, has all coincided with revelations that the Ministry of Defence is close to awarding Elbit Systems a contract worth in the region of £2 billion to train British soldiers. According to reports, the arrangement would place Elbit at the centre of the British Army's land warfare training programmes, with responsibility for preparing some 60,000 troops annually. For activists who had long described Elbit as Israel's war machine on British soil, this looked like a crushing defeat. The criminalisation of their movement had been the prelude to a massive deepening of UK Elbit ties. So the timing raises a rather obvious question, therefore. Was the banning of Palestine Action not a measure to protect security, but a political manoeuvre to clear obstacles for a controversial defence deal? And when Britain buys into Elbit at this moment in history, is it really buying security or something far darker? After all, this means the British Army will be trained by the same entity that trains the IDF. So what does that say about us? Whose security is really being protected here? And at what cost? Right, so the proscription of Palestine Action represented a dramatic shift in how protest is treated in the UK, and not for the better. Until July of this year, the Terrorism Act had been used primarily against organisations involved in violent plots or direct attacks on civilians. Actual terrorists. Palestine Action, by contrast, had built its campaign around sabotage and disruption, occupying Elbit offices, spraying paint on buildings, scaling factory roofs, damaging military equipment. We all know they're crap by now, do we not? Its activists prided themselves on direct action against war criminals, but they'd not engaged in acts designed to cause physical harm to people. Indeed, leaked assessments revealed that the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, JTAC, who advise on matters of prescription to the Home Secretary, had concluded that the group's actions were focused on property, not life. The Foreign Office reportedly warned that designating the network as terrorist would look like silencing dissent and aligning with Israeli interests rather than protecting national security. I bet David Lammy didn't much like his department coming out with that one, did they? And Yvette Cooper clearly didn't like what JTAC had to say either. Because despite these warnings, prescription of course pressed ahead under Keir Starmer. It was his government, his ministers, his Home Office that signed off on one of the most far overreaching uses of the Terrorism Act we've ever seen. The official justification centred on the high-profile action at RAF Bryce Norton. Cast our minds back to what happened there, where the activists entered the base and defaced some aircraft with some paint. The government claimed this endangered military readiness, despite these planes being owned by a hedge fund and not the MOD. They just leased them, and demonstrated a willingness to cross into terrorism, therefore. Yet critics pointed to the extraordinary breadth of the move. 70% of Labour members opposed the ban, a striking demonstration of how far the leadership had moved away from its base, but they don't care. Civil liberties groups called it an unprecedented attack on the right to protest. They're absolutely right. High-profile figures such as novelist Sally Rooney pledged to continue funding Palestine Action in defiance of the prescription, prompting the Home Office to issue chilling warnings against material support. Well, she lives in Ireland, so good luck with that extradition order, Yvette. Anyway, the deeper context reveals the significance of timing, though. Palestine Action had focused relentlessly on Elbit Systems. By disrupting its sites, vandalising offices, and generating headlines about its role in Gaza, the activists had cost the company millions and damaged its reputation. If Elbit was on the verge of securing a contract worth £2 billion to deliver British Army training, the criminalisation of its principal domestic opponent was politically expedient, to say the least, wasn't it? The question must be asked, therefore. We're all asking it, aren't we? Was this counter-terrorism, or was it corporate counterinsurgency instead? When protest is suppressed, but not because of violence, but because it threatens commercial relations with a foreign arms company, an Israeli one at that, as Israel commits genocide, democracy itself is thrown out the window as well, isn't it? And you can't help but wonder if the hand of the Prime Minister, that Zionist without equivocation, is visible in this too. To understand the gravity of Britain's entanglement here, it's worth appreciating Elbit's role. Elbit is Israel's largest arms company. It produces Hermes drones, Skylark reconnaissance UAVs, Iron Sting guided mortars, advanced surveillance platforms. These technologies have been used extensively in Gaza, where drones provide constant aerial monitoring and mortars are deployed in dense urban environments. The company markets its products as battle-tested, of course, doesn't it? A phrase widely understood as a euphemism for weapons tried and tested and refined on Palestinian civilians, because we know this is what happens, don't we? Elbit's presence in Britain is long-standing already, though, to our shame. Those factories of theirs targeted by Palestine Action, they didn't appear out of nowhere overnight, after all. Through Project Vulcan, it runs a £57 million contract providing simulation training for tank crews. It supplies artillery and mortar simulators for the army, contracts awarded in 2023 under the Tories. It has sold night vision goggles to the Ministry of Defence under deals worth more than £25 million between 2021 and 22. Through a partnership with Babcock, it's delivered £73 million worth of electronic warfare systems to the Royal Navy. Historically, it worked with Thales to deliver the Watchkeeper drone, a project costing about £1.35 billion before its retirement earlier this year. It also has a joint venture with KBR under the UK Military Flying Training System, a £500 million 18-year arrangement providing aircraft and synthetic training. So the picture is sadly very clear. Elbit is already very much embedded in British defence infrastructure. The proposed £2 billion contract covering collective land training for 60,000 soldiers annually would not be an entry point for them at all, but very much a continuation, albeit a very, very big one. It would place Elbit even more at the heart of Britain's military doctrine, shaping mission rehearsal, combined arms training, and after-action analysis for an entire generation of troops. As Middle East Eye and The Cradle have reported, this is not a marginal deal, but one of the largest training contracts in Europe. To award it to a company synonymous with Israel's war in Gaza is to accept complicity not only symbolically, but structurally, and without a second thought. The government and Elbit insist that the training contract is about simulation and technology and not politics. Well, that's always going to be a nonsense argument because everything is political. There's no such thing as not doing politics. Elbit's UK website describes deployable collective training environments, integrating live and virtual exercises, as well as gunnery trainers and artillery fire rehearsal platforms. From one perspective, these are neutral tools for soldiers to practice coordination, target acquisition and communications. Yet optics matter. The International Court of Justice has ruled that Israel's conduct in Gaza presents a plausible risk of genocide. So in that context, contracting the IDF's chief supplier to train British troops is obscene. The rhetorical question then resonates in all our minds, I'm sure. What do people think soldiers are being trained in by such as Elbit? How to conduct genocide and get away with it, perhaps? Sociopathy 101. How to take the best selfies in a scene of abject devastation, perhaps? Sure, this is me being flippant now, isn't it? But upon hearing this news and wondering what our troops might actually be trained in, given what the IDF have been doing for 22 months in Gaza, having had similar training, such thoughts, I think, are an unavoidable association. Elbit Systems are battle-proven precisely because they have been used in Gaza. Its training tools mirror the environments of dense civilian populations, the very spaces where the IDF has levelled neighbourhoods. Its drones are the same as those circling Gaza's skies. Its battle management software is what coordinates Israel's combined arms operations. To the public, the distinction between simulation and doctrine collapses here, I feel. Soldiers might be practicing on virtual platforms, but what were those platforms built off the back of? Because we know all too well by now, don't we? To ask what British troops are going to be trained in, the answer is basically methodology that belongs on trial at The Hague. The reputational cost is immense, and deservedly so, it should be. Britain risks being seen not as a defender of law, but as a student of impunity. Allies who have moved to distance themselves, such as the Netherlands, will see Britain's choice as an outlier. Citizens who oppose complicity will feel silenced and criminalised. In effect, Elbit's training contract becomes not simply an exercise in preparation, but what critics will inevitably call a genocide school. The Elbit contract sits alongside Britain's broader arms licensing policies, which reveal a consistent pattern of double standards as well. Last year, the government announced a suspension of around 30 export licenses to Israel, didn't they? Citing the clear risk of misuse in Gaza. And at first glance, this looked like a step towards compliance with international law finally, didn't it? But the suspension was heavily selective. The most significant supply lines, particularly the provision of components for F-35 fighter jet programs, which are the most well-known exceptions, have continued unabated. And this isn't a technicality either. No matter how much the Starmer regime hide behind such claims, Israel operates at least 36 F-35 aircraft, with more deliveries planned. Every single one contains British-made components, because that's how the F-35 supply line works. These jets have been central to Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Thus, even as ministers voted the suspensions, Britain's factories continued to produce parts for the very aircraft bombing civilians. When challenged in the High Court on this, government lawyers argued that there was no evidence of genocide. Yet this sat uneasily beside the ICJ's binding orders, recognising the risk of that, plausibly as they'd already identified. The government managed a split screen in effect. On one side, limited suspensions to appease critics, and on the other, ongoing supply to sustain Israel's war machine. And this hypocrisy corrodes credibility. To the public, it looks like deception, because it is. To lawyers, it edges towards complicity. To international observers, it suggests Britain prioritises industrial commitments over human rights, which looks even worse when we're led by a supposed former human rights lawyer. And it raises the central question, is Britain's defence policy driven by principle or by a refusal to jeopardise lucrative programmes, even at the cost of enabling atrocities? For Keir Starmer's government, the answer seems pretty clear, doesn't it? Elbit's role in destabilization is not confined to Gaza, though. Just last week, the company announced a $1.63 billion contract with an unnamed European country, which turned out to be Serbia, supplying Hermes drones and precision missiles and electronic warfare systems and command and control platforms. Serbian media described it as a historic upgrade, but regional analysts warned of grave risks. Such a vast injection of advanced weaponry into the Balkans could prompt neighbouring states, the likes of Croatia and Bosnia and Kosovo, to respond in kind, igniting a new arms race in a region still scarred by war, and certainly the people of Serbia have not been happy about this, mass protests having broken out. But the relevance to Britain lies in reputation. By embedding Elbit in its training programmes, Britain is aligning itself with a company not only implicated in Gaza, but also in the destabilisation of Europe. The optics extend beyond complicity in genocide to complicity in regional insecurity. If the Balkans descended to renewed conflict, Elbit's role would be scrutinised, and Britain, as one of its most prominent partners now, will not be immune from association. Once again, the question arises, therefore, is Britain safeguarding its own security or importing instability and entanglement by tying itself all the more to Elbit's fortunes? Surely there are other arms companies from other countries. Why this one? Why Israel? Well, why isn't it, frankly, isn't it? Underlying these developments is the economic dimension as well. Israel's economy, as we know, has been battered by the war on Gaza. Tourism has collapsed, foreign investment has slowed, the tech sector has seen layoffs, credit ratings have been downgraded. Defence exports, however, have been robust. They remain robust. Contracts like the UK's £2 billion training deal or Serbia's $1.63 billion procurement inject critical cash. They support the shekel, reassure Israeli investors, sustain tax revenues. They allow Israel to finance its military operations despite reputational damage and partial sanctions that may have been invoked by other nations. Thus, Britain's deal with Elbit is not just about training at all. It's a financial lifeline too. By awarding contracts of this magnitude, and incidentally, as we're being warned of further cuts and tax hikes here to our incomes, Starmer and Reeves can still always find money for war and defence contracts, can't they? Lining Israel's pockets in the process. Britain is helping keep Israel's war economy afloat. The complicity is therefore not only symbolic or doctrinal, but also fiscal. Britain is paying into the coffers of the company most directly associated with the destruction of Gaza, and in doing so, it undermines the efforts of international civil society to isolate Israel economically through boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. It becomes a part of the machine, a willing financier of destruction dressed up as procurement. Those behind it belong in The Hague. The Genocide Convention obliges states not only to punish, but to prevent genocide. In the Bosnia versus Serbia judgment of 2007, the ICJ held that this duty arises when a state knew or should have known of a serious risk. The ICJ has already determined that Israel's actions in Gaza constitute such a risk. Britain is therefore under a positive obligation to take measures within its capacity to prevent genocide. That case has been proven, so now we're being made complicit by the Starmer government. Continuing to provide arms and contracts moves in the opposite direction. International law also recognises complicity through aid or assistance. Article 16 of the International Law Commission's Articles on State Responsibility states that a state is responsible if it knowingly assists another in committing an internationally wrongful act, where the assistance significantly contributes to the act. Supplying parts for F-35s used in Gaza, awarding major contracts to Elbit, and silencing domestic protest all contribute materially. The government's argument that Elbit Systems UK is a separate entity is legally weak, as Israeli arms companies cannot export without state approval. The nexus with the Israeli state is therefore unavoidable. Thus, Britain is not only failing in its duty to prevent genocide, it is edging perilously close to liability for complicity. In my view, we're already past that point. Ministers may protest that these are routine procurement decisions, but international law is clear. Knowledge plus contribution equals responsibility. If genocide is eventually confirmed, Britain will not be a bystander, it will be seen as an enabler. Beyond law and optics lies democracy, though. The proscription of Palestine Action occurred despite overwhelming opposition within the Labour Party. 70% of the members opposed the move, yet the leadership proceeded regardless, because the membership, well, they should just know their place. Why are you still a member of the Labour Party? What do you get out of it these days? Cultural figures were threatened for pledging support. Protest was criminalised while corporate contracts were advanced. This inversion, citizens punished, corporations rewarded, raises profound questions. Whose voices count in Britain's defence policy? Not the public, not party members, but the foreign arms companies that profit from war. This democratic deficit is compounded by secrecy. Defence contracts are negotiated behind closed doors with limited parliamentary scrutiny. The public is told that security requires such arrangements, yet the outcome is a policy that aligns Britain with genocide while silencing dissent at home. The legitimacy of such governance has to be questioned then, doesn't it? A democracy that criminalises protest to protect corporate contracts ceases to act as a democracy in any meaningful sense. Starmer's government has, in effect, chosen to treat solidarity with Palestinians as criminal, or solidarity with Israeli arms dealers, state policy. Contrast Britain's path with that of the Netherlands for a minute. I brought them up earlier, and there's a reason for that, because they've just chosen a different course. Organisers of the Netherlands Defence and Security Exhibition in Rotterdam have just barred Israeli firms, including Elbit, Rafael and Israel Aerospace Industries, from participating in it. The decision was justified on security grounds, but clearly reflected the broader context of the Gaza war. The Dutch government has also curtailed military exports, suspended Israel's access to EU research programmes, and reviewed its bilateral agreements. This demonstrates that alternatives do exist, that there is such a thing as leadership being shown in the face of genocide. It just isn't happening here. Western states can choose to distance themselves. The Netherlands has taken steps to signal disapproval and reduce complicity. Norway has divested from Israeli companies, another 6 of them recently out of the 11, with many more still being looked at. Even within the EU, there's a growing recognition that normalising ties while genocide is alleged is untenable. Britain, by contrast, has moved in the complete opposite direction, deepening its ties and criminalising dissent. This makes it an outlier, not a leader. Makes it a coward, not a leader. It suggests a government more determined to protect arms deals than uphold law. For a country that so often invokes its history as a defender of law and liberty, for someone like Starmer, who does it so often given his past track record and his career, the hypocrisy is blatant and it is gut-churning. And the consequences of Britain's choices are grave, to say the least. Legally, the UK risks being drawn into proceedings at the ICJ or ICC itself, either for failing to prevent genocide or for aiding and abetting it. Politically, it risks diplomatic isolation as other European states move to disengage. Reputationally, it risks being seen as a nation learning from genocide rather than resisting it. Domestically, it risks alienating its own citizens, criminalising protest, and undermining democratic legitimacy. Strategically, it risks embedding Israeli doctrine in its armed forces, a doctrine condemned worldwide for its disregard of civilian life. These are not hypothetical risks, they're already materialising. Britain's courts are hearing challenges to arms exports. Civil society is mobilising, and thank God for it. Allies are questioning its choices. History will judge harshly those who chose complicity over prevention. Starmer's rancid government is already reaping what it sows after a year in power, though, with voter intention for Labour now standing at just 18%. It has never been that low in the Labour Party's history, and a year ago they enjoyed polling of more than 40%. The Starmer effect. It's like the anti-Lynx effect, isn't it? Never has a government become so hated so quickly, save that of the idiot Truss. The haunting question is whether Britain will be remembered as a state that upheld law or one that paid billions to learn impunity from a company accused of fueling genocide. Britain did not accidentally align itself with Israel's war machine. It did so by design. It silenced dissent by proscribing Palestine Action. It deepened contracts with Elbit Systems even as Gaza burned. It continued to supply F-35 parts while boasting of suspensions. It ignored the ICJ's orders while claiming adherence to law. And it rewarded corporations whilst criminalising citizens. This is not neutrality, it is complicity. The UK is not merely failing to prevent genocide, it is financing, embedding and legitimising the companies that enable it. So in years to come, when historians ask what Britain did during the Gaza genocide, the answer is not going to be a flattering one, and this will come to define Keir Starmer in the history books. The UK did not stand aside, it did not protest, it chose to learn from, fund and protect the very apparatus of Gaza's destruction. This is complicity by design, and it is a stain on us all that will not easily be washed away. So in light of this, the ban on Palestine Action is reflected even more foully on this foul government, and particularly on Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, who is still defending her stance, despite the judicial review coming, and the news that JTAC's report to her to advise her on the correct course of action regarding Palestine Action, leaked into the public domain as it has been, completely contradicts everything she's been saying. Should the prescription be lifted, she probably won't survive the fallout as a result. She doesn't really deserve to either, in my view. So get the details of that oh dear how sad never mind story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.